Hey, and welcome back to Tarot for You 444. I'm so delighted to have you with me today. Today is going to be a little bit different because I have been researching a dynamic that is hashtag crazy. And I wanted to tell everyone about it a little bit. I'm going to make a series. And this is going to be the first video in the series. So an introduction to BDSM and that dynamic, and how and why, I guess we could say how and why people are interested in that, and how it can be really, really dangerous or really, really healing actually. So I kind of, I think I need to just have a sip of my tea before I begin, because some of these, this topic is really an over 18 thing, Ooh, so I think I might do a caveat, on the video 18 plus, You must be 18 before listening to Nat talk about this topic. So what I've found really interesting after researching this dynamic and interviewing, will I say hundreds of people? Probably hundreds of people, is that most of the people who are into the BDSM dynamic are missing something from themselves. So I'm just going to draw. I love drawing. Okay. So the first thing is that how did I get into this? How did I start researching this, and why? Let's just talk about this for a little minute first. So after watching the movie 50 Shades of Grey, and then the subsequent movies thereafter, I realized that the popularity of 50 Shades of Grey was definitely due to the main character of Christian really being into Anastasia, so much so that he wanted to know, in a kind of controlling way, where are you, what are you doing, when are you going to be home? And then he also, if you haven't seen the movie, you can watch it, but he also wanted her to sign into, or sign a contract to be in this dynamic where he got to do pretty much whatever he wanted to do to her, but with her consent, okay, in a sexual way. So BDSM really becomes a transactional environment for both the dom and the sub, or the daddy and the little, or the master and the slave. So I'm just going to write some of these terms down for you so that you can go on Google and go, oh my God, what? I know most of you will know a lot about this anyway, but I'm just going to write some of the terms down. Okay, so we have, oh, that's not going to work, is it? Hang on. It's because of the sunlight. Is that better? Hopefully you can see that. So we've got dom and sub, daddy and little, master and slave. And the daddy and little dynamic is basically, that's a bit more, I'll do a video on that. But you can, of course, Google those things. So basically we've got someone who is going to be in the role of being dominant, and someone who is going to be in the role of being submissive. And this can be, doesn't have to be the man being in control and the woman being the submissive. It can actually switch places. So what I've found really, really interesting about, learning this dynamic is the how and the why. So, how is it that people want to be in such a dynamic, and why on earth would they be doing these things with each other? I actually stumbled across some some information on social media where I found it really interesting. A dominant who actually was a master, and he would have slaves. He decided that he wanted to have a slave that he could do anything to, and including inflicting pain, as long as she was consensual to that. And so that would be known as wow, throat chakra going crazy here. Hang on. Wow, this is a topic, isn't it? So the guy in this particular position would be known as a sadist. So he enjoys inflicting pain. Masochist. He's the masochist, and the submissive is the sadist. Okay. So someone who is a masochist might, on a really simple level, they might just want to, use candle wax or something like that. And so that might cause some pain, but, we can go up in the levels of pain, and over time someone could be trained to endure lots of different types of pain, which is either sexual or non-sexual, actually. But in this dynamic he had with one woman, he found out that she had a fear of being kidnapped, and that was her biggest fear in her life. And so what he did, and I found this really interesting, is he said he recreated a kidnapping scene where she was going to be walking out in the woods somewhere, and a car would come and take her. I guess he got some friends or something to help him do this role play with her, and she knew it was going to happen, and it was completely consensual. But what he did was he had her kidnapped, and she was bound and gagged and all of those things that she was terrified of, and then put in this car and taken, it wasn't very far, taken to his house, and then then he did the sexual things with her. So it became, her fear actually became something that was overcome, because the reward for going through the trauma of that, was getting pleasured by him. So I found that really interesting, that sometimes these dynamics are really long term, and people do the things that they do to work through certain traumas. Another example might be the case of a submissive that might have been raped or something like that in earlier in life, and perhaps during that rape she was held by the wrists or something like that. So maybe for her that would be called a hard limit, so she wouldn't want to do that. But over time what can happen is, in a BDSM dynamic with trust, the dominant can understand the fears of the sub and use the dynamic to help her desensitize from that fear. So desensitization is one of the reasons why people love the dynamic, because things that they're afraid of, maybe they're afraid of pain, and they can work into, being able to withstand certain types of pain, or maybe they're afraid of, maybe they're claustrophobic, and their partner could, do a scene where they're, locked in a cupboard or something like that. But, obviously there's going to be safe words, and obviously there's going to be consent beforehand. Okay. So what I love about the dynamic is the fact that people who are, in a trusting, loving dynamic with one another can share these experiences where the dominant can, kind of have his needs met sexually and otherwise, and the sub can also have their needs met because they want to, the sub automatically usually wants to, be not used, but be pushed to some kind of limit. I don't drink alcohol, so tea is it for me, right? I'm just like, I'm like, wow, this 18 plus video. I haven't said any rude words yet, have I? That's good. All right. Whew, what a topic. So what can happen in the case of, I want to talk a little bit about Stockholm Syndrome, which I've talked about before on my channel. But this was the case in Stockholm where a woman was actually really kidnapped for real. And her abuser would do nasty things to her and then would do nice things to her. So, you know, as obviously, you know, like she would be tied up, and this is actually not really related to BDSM, but kind of is, because some of the themes are related. But, you know, she was tied to a bed and was, you know, stopped from eating and all of that stuff until he wanted to do that. You know, the control level was huge. And then he would, you know, have sex with her and give her pleasure. So it's this pleasure and pain, pleasure and pain, pleasure and pain, pleasure and pain. And it actually is as addictive as, you know, I don't know, caffeine or chocolate or cigarettes or, you know, methamphetamines, because it tells the brain that even though I'm enduring this pain right now, I know that I will get pleasure. And one of the other things in BDSM that happens is that, you know, after what's called a scene might be, you know, where they've both agreed, let's say in the kidnapping scenario, you know, you're going to be walking in a park, I'm going to kidnap you somehow, you know, via car, then I'll bring you back and, you know, do and pleasure you at, you know, at our place or something like that, right? So that would be a scene. And this would be always consensual, of course, but you can see how the trauma bonding can occur, because on one hand, she's, you know, that particular woman had to endure the kidnapping part, and then she gets home and she gets pleasured by her dom or by her master. And so what would happen over time if he continued to do these things where he was, you know, causing her some sort of pain or distress in some kind of way, and then was giving her pleasure and continually mixing this up all the time, then she becomes addicted. And this is also why, if you're a twin flame or a light worker, I want to talk about this as well within your own relationships with people and or partners, and why, you know, why women get addicted to bad boys, let's say. So what happens is, you know, let's say you meet a guy online and he's like, hey, and you're like, hey, and you start talking to one another and it feels pleasure filled, right? And then what happens, and it could, you know, it can go either way. It can be the man being the player or the bad boy, or the woman being the bad girl. You know, I'm not doing gender specific here. But what might happen is they might, you know, come together and have a great time and go on a few dates and, you know, perhaps, you know, have sex with one another, and then maybe, let's just say, he pulls away and says, you know, I'm busy, I don't want to talk to you, right? And so she's going, oh, okay. And this also happens in the twin flame dynamic, of course. And she's like, oh no, what did I do? Maybe I did something wrong. And so she's desperately trying to work out what she did wrong. And then, you know, maybe she'll send a million texts saying, you know, what did I do? You know, how come we can't see each other? And he's like, I'm just working right now. And he's all blasé. And this causes an addiction as well. So what can happen in the twin flame dynamic, as well as in the, in a bad boy or a BDSM dynamic, is, or bad girl, is that people can become really, really addicted to someone. So it's kind of like, you know, you dangle the carrot in front of the bunny and then you take it away. And then you dangle the carrot in front of the bunny and then you take it away. And this causes an addictive cycle. Okay, so some people know what they're doing, and this, and even on dating websites and things, men and women are being taught to do this. Things like if someone texts you that you're interested in, you wait, like if they took, or let's say you texted them, all right, let me start again. So if you texted someone and they took 30 minutes to reply, you would take double the time to reply. This is what some of the really toxic dating coaches are teaching, right? So the other person, will be there checking their phone. You know what social media is like? Oh, hang on, I sent that message, an hour ago, or I sent that message, 3 hours ago, and they're still not back, So some people use this as a tactic. And it's kind of related to the BDSM dynamic, because the master or the dom or the daddy, depending on which dynamic someone's in, is in control of the other person. So they might control, it might even get really, really creepy to the point where someone's controlling when someone can eat, or what they can wear, or if they can have an orgasm or not, things like that. Okay, so depending, obviously if it's an LDR, a long distance relationship, or a close proximity relationship, things would be different. But there is this element of the Stockholm syndrome. We litter you with, the dom or the master, or the dom, master, or daddy would, give a punishment perhaps if something wasn't done properly, and that punishment could be sexual or otherwise. And of course, I want to get specific in future videos about this BDSM dynamic, so that I can talk about actual topics, in one box, in one video. But for now, I'm just sprinkling you with the reasons why usually we have a dom. A dom is usually, or a master or a daddy, let's just put them in that category of being dominant. But they are usually someone who feels the need to have some sort of control, okay? And it's also usually a turn on as well, so they get turned on by that control. You can't have breakfast until 8 o'clock, and when you do have breakfast, let's say it's an LDR, you will take a photo of your breakfast and show me that you've, what you ate today, okay? And if the person didn't eat breakfast, of course, all these rules would be agreed upon in the beginning. But if that person didn't eat their breakfast, they might get punished. And I will, in subsequent videos, I'll talk about punishments and things like that. So we have this idea, and I'm going to use my drawing skills again. We have this idea of pain and pleasure, and pain and pleasure, and pain and pleasure. Okay? So the pain might not necessarily be inflicting pain on someone that hurts them. Maybe it's not nipple clamps, but maybe the pain is emotional pain. Maybe they're not texting back, right? And these are relevant to both light workers and twin flames. Okay. So we have this idea of pain here. Like we'll talk about the example of the woman that gets kidnapped. So she gets pain because she knows she's going to have to endure, walking in the woods on her own. It might be beautiful in the woods, so that's her pleasure there. But then when the car comes past in the distance, she might not know if that's the kidnapping car or not. And then it goes past and she feels pleasure again because she's in the woods. And then she might hear a truck go by and go, oh, maybe he's going to use a truck to kidnap me in. I don't know, because I'm not 100% sure what he's going to do, because this is my fear. And then that goes by and she sees a pretty bird in the woods, and that's beautiful. and then the actual car comes and causes her pain again. So can you see we've got this element of pain and pleasure and pain and pleasure and pain and pleasure. In the case of just BDSM in a scene, we might have, someone bent over, it could be the man or the woman, and, we're starting a spanking scenario, let's say. And so the spank would come, on the bare bottom, like that. And the person might gasp. I'm not going to gasp. and then we might get, a finger somewhere or a hand somewhere else that feels good. All right. So we can understand that this dynamic is pleasure and pain, pleasure and pain, pleasure and pain, pleasure and pain. And it's actually a very addictive cycle. So if you've ever smoked cigarettes, or even if you've ever been hungry, you'll know that the pain of enduring the waiting of not being able to have the cigarette, or the pain of, not being able to eat that food when it's lunchtime and, your boss has made you sit there for 2 more hours to finish off a project or something. That pain is then, when you can finally have that cigarette or finally have that, massive roast lunch that you were, really wanting, you subsided then. So you kind of, it's relief. All right. So the BDSM dynamic is pain, pleasure, pain, pleasure, pain, pleasure, pain, pleasure. In the case of Daddy Dom, that's, kind of more loving. There would be less pain and a lot more pleasure. But if the rules weren't followed, as in, if you didn't eat breakfast, or if you didn't comply to the rules that you promised, or if you were late to text back or something like that, then in the case of a daddy little scenario, the daddy might punish the little by, I don't know, making them write lines, or, withholding sex, or, not buying them that stuffy or something like that. But like I said, we'll go into each dynamic. I'll talk about masters and slaves. I'll talk about daddies and littles or middles. And I'll also have a video where I talk about just dom and sub, and as it relates to BDSM. But it's very much an addictive thing that people like to get into, because the bond is like this. Right, we have again the pain and the pleasure, and 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 both people want to experience that, because the dom or the master or the daddy also wants to inflict pain so that they can then scoop up the sub and love them more each time. So it's like, I'm going to inflict pain on you to see how much I can push your boundaries, see how strong you are, see what I can do, and then I'm going to love you. You see what I mean? So this can be a very dangerous dynamic for people who have mental health problems and who've been through trauma, or it can be a very healing dynamic with someone you trust and love that is doing it so that you can be pushed further, so that you can push the limits. But it wouldn't be something you would want to do if you had a mental health condition, or if you had any kind of abandonment wounding, unless you knew that your dom or your master or your daddy was someone who was doing it, as a scene to kind of better you as a person. Because that's the role of the dominant, is to better the sub as a person in a proper dynamic, in a real dynamic where you've got a caring two lot of people. And of course they don't have to be man and woman, it could be man and man or woman and woman. So take gender how it resonates for you. So I think I'm going to leave it there for this first video, because that's a lot to unpack. Some of you may not have even heard of it, or have never watched 50 Shades. I'm trying to think of that other movie. I think it's called The Secretary. And that's also an older movie, but it's a good one relating to BDSM if you're interested in the BDSM dynamic. And, you know, he kind of gets off on, you know, the whole spanking kind of thing, and she wants to do as she's told, so she does that for him. But it's an interesting movie. If if you're not into it, it doesn't matter. It's just that I wanted to bring this into the twin flame dynamic and even into the light worker dynamic, so that you can see that if you were in one of these kind of dynamics, it would be very much like the twin flame journey, because there's always pain, separation, and then we come together, which is the pleasure. And then we separate and we come together, and we separate and we come together, and we separate, and we may even leave the journey, and that's pain. All right, so it's pain, pleasure, pain, pleasure, pain, pleasure in the twin flame dynamic. Many light workers also experience this with third dimensional consciousness people. You know, that person that was really lovely to you turns out to be a narcissist, let's say. You know what I mean? So the BDSM dynamic can teach us a lot, actually, about the twin flame journey and about the light worker path. And, you know, it very much correlates in many ways. So I hope you enjoyed this first video for the BDSM series. I'm going to really look forward to bringing you more of these before Christmas, so that you can learn all about it and learn how it does feed into, you know, any kind of spiritual dynamic that you're already in, and you can understand it, and you can, you know, kind of instead of, I always talk about the Sims, but instead of being in the game, just imagine you were a Sim in the game. I want you to imagine that you can come up onto the mountain and be the creator of the game and look down on it. So this is kind of the reason I want to do this series is so we can look down on the dynamic of this and see how much it correlates to the twin flame journey, and why it's really important to understand this. So your homework today is to watch the first movie in the 50 Shades of Grey series, which is called 50 Shades of Grey. And what I want you to focus upon is the dominant, which is Christian Grey. And then I want you to also focus on the character of Anastasia, who would be the submissive. And I want you to see how different their perspectives are from one another, and then how addictive the bond can be between the two of them. All right. So I want you to see that the addiction of this pain, pleasure, pain, pleasure, pain, pleasure, pain, pleasure, right? You know, he misses her and then he spanks her. You know, she doesn't want a part of it, but then she's desperate for him. You know what I mean? It's this constant up and down roller coaster of emotion. You know, they're either on or off, or there's either drama or there's bliss. You know, it's this duality that the twin flames go through in the dynamic. Because when your twin flame comes in, it feels like bliss. It feels like amazing. It feels like amazing. That's not even English. It feels amazing. It feels wonderful. And then they leave again. Okay, so this is why I'm bringing this series to the channel. I find it's going to be really helpful. I've been studying it for a really long time, and I've interviewed hundreds of people. So you're going to get the tea on, you know, people, consensual people. And I didn't spank anyone. I didn't tie anyone up. I promise. They were all consensual. But the information that I found out was, whew, make you sweat. All right. So thank you so much for joining me today. If you are new to my channel and you want to check out my services, or even if you're not new and you want to enjoy my services, I have 10% off of all of my services until the 25th of December 2021. And I wish all of you a beautiful day, night, afternoon, evening, or morning, wherever you are in the world. And I'll see you real soon for my next video. Bye, everyone. Bye.